Hello and welcome to Unsheathed number 5. I am, as always, Kyell Gold.
And I am K.M. Hirosaki, here again.
And we are recording from an indiscreet, disclosed location. Both in the same place this time, with our tech-savvy wolf manning the microphone.
And providing the wine for at least one of us.
Yes. And I have my traditional Coke Zero. And we are all set to get to your wonderful questions. So before Hirosaki's laptop dies, I think I'll let him go on.
It may actually die in mid-email, knowing this, so I'll try to read quickly. So this is from Condrel again. He writes, Condrel. Lieutenant Condrel. Evening, you two crazy penwigglers. I do have a question for you, though it's got a bit of a story behind it. At some point in my rather troubled childhood, I was punished with a weekly assignment from my father. Each weekend, on my precious Saturday, I was tasked with writing a perfect page. The topic didn't matter much, though I wasn't allowed to expound on my perennial favorites of fantasy and science fiction. What was important was that each and every word was correct both grammatically and contextually. There was no second draft and no do-over. If his red pen had to come out and mark anything, I would have to write another perfect page from scratch, due the next evening. Now, I'm not asking for sympathy or condemnation for my child self. See? There it goes. I was a bastard as a kid, and caused my parents no end of trouble. Instead, though, this prolonged punishment taught me to proofread as I write. On the upside, I can fairly confidently post my short stories without much revision beyond a pass through the spell checker. On the downside, though, this has left me woefully inadequate in accurately judging my own writing beyond the surface content. How do you two judge your own work for consistency and quality after the initial first draft? Is there some mnemonic or mental tool you use that I might benefit from? Regards, J. Fox Rosenberg.
A.k.a. Condrel.
Yes.
Well, I think you said it best in your first response to this email, which was...
Yeah, when I'm done writing my stuff, I send it to him and let him tell me if it's good.
Oh, no, your first response was, dude, your dad's a dick.
Oh! Yeah,
like
that's right. Yes.
Yeah, we do send it back and forth to each other, so we have that. But he was talking more about how do you judge your own work for consistency and quality, and the mnemonic or mental tool that I use is I set it down and I walk away from it and I do other stuff for a few weeks. And people always say that as something you ought to do, and I was thinking today a little bit about why that is that works. And it's especially pertinent to me as I'm in the middle of re-editing the novel Shadow of the Father, which I'm hoping to get out in January. And as I'm going through it, I'm realizing that what stepping away from the work allows you to do is to get away from the actual words. So I had the story in my mind. I wrote down the best approximation I could to the story that was in my mind. As I get away from it, as I sort of distance myself from the actual words, I find that the story in my mind is clearer and closer to what I'd intended. And occasionally I'll go back and I'll find that the words that I wrote are not exactly right according to what I was thinking. I'll come back with some impression like, I thought, I realized this character was supposed to have done this and this and this, and you go through the text and it's not very clear. So it really helps to kind of get back to the idea of the story, which you have to do by distancing yourself from the words of the story.
And I was going to say something very similar. My first suggestion being about judging your own work is to take some time away from it before going back to it. It's actually kind of amazing the difference you'll see if you read over your own story right after you've finished writing it, and then after you've put a week or several weeks, depending on the length of the story and how much distance you need. When a story is fresh in your mind, you will miss a lot of things because your brain is already thinking in certain terms, and it will fill in, it will gloss over mistakes because you already know what it's supposed to be, and so it's sort of this like mental glitch where you won't even notice if something's out of place because it's like you're sort of writing blind spot in a way. Or at least that's what it's like for me. If I've taken time away from something and then I go back to it, I'll go back and read things I've written. And there are times I'll read a sentence and go, I don't even know what I was trying to say there.
I've actually gone back and read sentences and said, I don't remember writing these words. I know I did because they're in the file and I remember the words before them, but I don't remember writing these words.
That's usually one of those sentences where you're like, I'm going to take this out because it's not very good.
It'd be nice if the ones I didn't remember were actually good, but I've had, occasionally I'll go back and I'll have stories that I forgot about, and I'll just be like, wow, I don't remember writing this story at all.
Yeah, I dug up a story. Well, I didn't dig up. I was reading a story that I wrote about 1.5 years ago and just read a couple of pages of it. And there was a big disconnect between what I intellectually remember writing and being surprised at the words I was seeing. In this case, it was mostly a good thing, but...
Yeah. And your brain does fill in stuff. I'm not sure it's a glitch. It makes me think of dreams, which basically is your brain filling in background to a bunch of disconnected images that your subconscious is sending out, and
your brain will make it make sense, even if it outwardly doesn't.
Yeah, your brain turns it into a story, which is great, and your brain fills in images. We see everything upside down, and our brain flips the image for us and fills in stuff when we miss things, and lots of comics and movies are based on that. And so,
I'll have dreams where people are using words that don't really exist, but my brain will create a framework where I have to understand what it means.
Oh, yeah. And I'll have dreams where I know, the person that I'm walking around with, I'm like, oh, they're one of my best friends, and I have no idea what their name is. They fall into that category of, they're a friend. So, yeah, when you're writing the story, the story comes from this idea in your head, and you're trying to translate it into words, and when you're that close to it in the first draft, you're going to miss some stuff, and your brain's going to say, well, you need to explain all this, just jump ahead to what's going on and what the next action is. And I find that's especially true with some of the stuff I write because, as I said in the last episode, I tend to write more sparsely than the final product.
Yeah, and I'm just plain bad at proofreading my own stuff. But I'm even worse if I try to proofread it right after I write it.
Yeah, and it always helps to have someone else look at it. But someone you can trust.
And don't feel bad just in general about not being great at judging the quality of your own stuff. I don't think that that's necessarily a critical failing. You should be able to identify when it's bad, but...
Right. I don't know. Is that all? Is that all for that one?
I hope it does. I don't know if that constitutes a tangent or if that we sort of got into the philosophy of where our stories come from. Maybe a little both.
Maybe a little both. So we have the next letter from Kugo. This is an all K's episode, by the way.
Including the two of us.
Including the two of us. So Kugo writes in part, it's a long letter, so I'm going to trim out a little bit of it. I started to listen to your podcast on this week and found it quite interesting. It was too busy before, so I guess that's why I haven't seen you mentioning it. Sorry about mentioning your BJ discussions. I just never thought people could talk about that freely, like it's nothing to be embarrassed of.
What's embarrassing about blowjobs? Nothing.
Wow. Maybe it's just me living in quite a conservative country and hiding my instincts like it's something illegal. I bet I'm worse than the guy who wanted to use lube for oral sex. I don't think you are. Huh?
Yeah, no. You should be embarrassed if you've been doing that.
Anyway, I was wondering if you could help me a bit with some problem I'm having. I do write a bit. So far, sketches for one fantasy story I've been working on for about 10 years. I started to get the main idea. It still looks sketchy, but now I feel it. At some moment I decided that I don't want to write just one of a million similar fantasy stories in a typical fantasy world. I was interested in ancient religions and myths, and seeing lots of anthropomorphic characters there, I decided to create my own races. So I ended up with lots of anthros in the result. But I didn't stop just there. I started to explain how the world was created and why characters are living and how life circles in that realm. It all helps to understand the storyline better, but I'm afraid it might offend or hurt people's religious feelings. In your books, in the Vol Universe or Waterways, you put a lot of attention to religion, and I also found it in the X compilation. So I was wondering if you could tell me, are there any limits or rules of using religious themes in books, and how not to overdo it? And this is from Kugo, whose English is quite good for
I think he's Russian.
being Russian. Yes, he is from Russia. So, the X compilation was kind of all about religion. And religion's kind of a weird subject for me because in my everyday life I'm not very observant in any organized religion, but I do feel somewhat spiritual, and that's a personal thing, but it comes through in the work. And a lot of what people have commented about in the Vol books and in Waterways was the religions there. Of course, in Vol Universe, I made up the Panbestian Church, and it is a little bit disoriented sometimes to see people quoting from the scriptures of a church I made up in their signature files, which has happened a couple times.
I remember that.
Waterways is, of course, a more conventional religion, and actually spoke with a Catholic friend of mine about some of the things that came up in that book. So, as far as any limits or rules, I think you really just have to put in what you're comfortable with, and whatever your audience is interested in.
Yeah, know your audience, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're worried about offending people, think about who's going to read it, who might possibly be offended. And actually, on the subject of that, as a general rule, it has been my experience that people in general are less offended by the use of any fictitious religion than they are about having their own actual real-world religion co-opted for fictional purposes where they are not portrayed in a positive light. It sounds like this is an instance where he's making up religious doctrine for a story. That probably isn't going to rub anyone the wrong way. It would be my assumption. I can't imagine it would.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
For the same reason that, like in your Argaea stuff, you have your own religion that you've made up, and I can't imagine anyone throwing a fit over that.
No, and in fact, even in Waterways, where I'm using a more standard religion, the only comments that I've gotten on it that were sort of negative were saying it didn't seem like it was religious enough, that they thought Corey wasn't religious enough that it was 100% believable, but I think that was just kind of filtered through their own experience. They thought he should have experienced more guilt because of the religion that he was in, which I can see that.
In my experience, I think that Corey is more religious than most of the people I know. So that goes to show you what my reality filters are. And I think that on the whole, certainly in Waterways, you portrayed religion in a very positive light.
And that was something that I wanted to do because it's very common. The people that we hang out with and people that populate the furry fandom are, by and large, more, I almost want to say more educated, more into science than religion, although there are certainly furry Christian fellowships, and I knew a guy in the fandom who was a reverend, and I myself am a minister. But
you have ministered.
I have ministered. But in general, it's very easy to pick on organized religion and say that, or you point out all the things that are bad about it. And what I wanted to do is point out that there was also good things about it, and that was tough to do. It was something that I had to really look at, and that's why talking to my friend, who's a devout Catholic, was so valuable, because he really brings out all the positives in the religion. He views it as the Bible is a book of moral guidelines. It's not a strict word-for-word set of instructions.
They're more like guidelines.
I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. But, and especially, I think, as you said, explaining a religion, a fictional religion, with characters in your world, I think most of the people that are going to read an anthropomorphic fantasy novel are going to love that.
Yeah.
They love creation myths, they love new religion, and if you do enough of a detailed job with your religion, eventually you'll get some people quoting your religion in their SIG files of their emails.
Yeah. I think almost every review I've seen of Vol and Pendant of Fortune has called attention to the detail paid to religion.
Which was something that I did because religion is such a strong part of the society back in sort of the medieval Renaissance era
absolutely.
Of our world.
Yeah.
And
you almost can't have one without the other, because it was, especially, there wasn't separation of church and state.
Right.
And
church
since
was
it's
the state.
Yeah, and since it's a political plot, you can't just not have that there.
But in the Vol universe, it's a little more neutral, I think, than in Waterways. It's the church is there and it's important, but it doesn't really play a role one way or the other.
It's setting, though, and it's detail, and it makes
Right.
the setting feel more real for it being there.
Right, and that sort of brings up the other thing that I would mention about this letter, which is a lot of the stuff that you're writing about how the world was created, why the characters are living, how life comes about, and all of the religious and creative background. That's stuff that you might not necessarily need to put into the story itself. It's stuff that's good for you to know, but when you're writing the story, you want to just get right into the story. And in the fantasy world, especially in Furry, you can get a lot of leeway with world building.
Mm-hmm.
You can start off and spend a few pages just saying, this is the kind of world we're living in, this is all the wonderful things that happen in this world. In general, it's not really good practice, and you should just have those details as background and work them into the story as they become necessary.
Yeah, a good example of a story that does this really well is Watership Down, where they get into all the mythology and folklore of this, what is effectively religion, although it is more of like a folklore thing, but they distribute all that information throughout the book. They don't front load it. And I think even the actual creation myth in the actual book doesn't come until partway through.
Right.
I know that the film, I think that's
in the
they,
film
they,
it
they
comes
start
first,
it with
yeah.
that, but in the actual novel it comes
In the
partway
beginning,
through.
Fritz
Yes.
made the world.
I have to watch that again now that I'm not a child and won't be terrified of it.
Yeah, I watched it growing up, and it was pretty intense. I do remember thinking that I was going to be a little bit annoyed if the whole film was in the same style as that first creation myth.
That would be too stylized.
Yes, I agree.
I heard a couple of people say that about Kung Fu Panda, that they wish that the entire movie could have been done in the same style as the little prologue. I'm like, yeah, and I think when you get to heavy stylization, it only carries itself so far.
Yeah, I agree. Our tech-savvy wolf is having some... All right, well, we won't talk about that.
It doesn't involve pantslessness or wine,
No,
alas.
but it does involve clothing.
It does.
So, I don't know if that helps. Basically, write your story the way that you want it written, and keep your audience in mind, but don't write your story for the audience. If you want to make up your religion, if you want religion to be a strong part of the story, you just have to recognize that the people that are going to read your story are the ones that are going to be interested in religion. I found, actually, I was a little surprised at the number of people that picked up on the religion in Vol books, so I think there is an audience out there for that.
Absolutely. And I think that furries in general tend to be geared towards furry-specific spirituality, so I think that's part of what draws them to it.
Yeah.
Because within the fandom, there's not actually like a hierarchical, defined furry spirituality that we have.
No, but it's sort of a general totemic kind of thing.
Right. But it's not organized, and I think that there's an appeal to something being organized.
It's definitely not an Abrahamic faith.
That's true. But we're also not all really animal people, which I know
True.
is sad, but I know.
Although we could be. You can't tell just from the voices. So let's move on to our last K question, and this is from Kite Phoenix, who actually has several questions, and I'm going to let Hirosaki-san
All right, so
read that.
I will take this. He's telling us how he is dabbling in his own writing and has recently started to pick it back up again, thanks to Kyell and his work, specifically Out of Position, he mentions. But he does have a few questions. As published authors under your own nom de plume, Mr. Gold and Mr. Hirosaki, why did you choose to produce work under a pen name? Is it simply for furry reasons, or do you, like some other authors, prefer the anonymity? Should I move on to the second one first, or should we answer this one now?
Let's
Actually,
read the whole.
okay, I'll read the whole thing and then we
Read the
can
whole
answer
thing
them.
and we'll go through 'em.
So, secondly, and only because this has been bugging me for some time, what does the KM stand for? I'm amused that would actually bug someone.
I'm sure it bugs a lot of people. We may reveal the answer.
We may reveal the answer, or I might just bug you more. I might be a dick, like Kendall's dad. Thirdly, what is your preferred writing medium? I myself tend to veer more towards fountain pen for my notes and first drafts, then typewriter before shifting over to the Microsoft Word.
Then he mentions a writing exercise.
Right. Which are we on?
No, we can talk about that at the end.
Okay. But to get to the questions first, before it gets broken up and too distant. Producing work under a pen name, is it for furry reasons, or is it just because we prefer the anonymity? It's not for furry reasons. I actually started using the name because I didn't want people knowing I was writing gay porn. And since that was where my work was, I just sort of stuck with it. I'm less embarrassed about it now. As for anonymity, I'm not really big on that. If I wanted to be anonymous, I wouldn't be doing a podcast and I wouldn't make public appearances at conventions. So
yeah, same with me.
Yeah.
I was never really that interested in anonymity. The pen name, and I've talked about this a little bit on the live journal, is the pen name was more because I didn't want my real name associated with, as you said, gay furry porn, because I work in the high-tech industry, and while maybe 5 years ago most of the employees in the industry did not know how to use Google, now they do. And if you Google Kyell Gold, you'll come up with a lot of links. If you Google my actual name, you will not come up with any links to Kyell Gold, as far as I know. So, trying to keep all that separate. It was mostly to keep the furry erotica separate from the other stuff, and just from my other online identity. And as I said, Kit and I joked when I first started writing under the name that, haha, just wait and see, Kyell Gold will become better known than your actual name. And yeah, we're still laughing about that, but for different reasons. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Whereas I think I'm the opposite, and I'm not going to get into too much more of that, possibly for reasons of anonymity.
Well, if you just finish your Game of Thrones series, then people would...
I think Game of Thrones has done its Wheel of Time. That isn't ever going to finish now, I don't think. There's a lot of work I need to finish. In actuality, stuff I've been working on that I need to finish, and I know I keep promising you I will. And I keep promising my readers that I will, and I promise I'll get that out there. And then he asks, what does the KM stand for? Now, I'm actually surprised at how infrequently I get asked this. Now, there's actually only once that I've ever told anyone what the KM stands for. Basically, one night, Kit got me drunk, and I told him and Kyell what it stood for. I'm not even sure if either of them remember. They might. I'd be they might remember the M. I doubt either of them remembers the K. So, I will tell you and whoever else is listening what has become sort of a stock response. I could be a real jerk and give the instructions on how to figure it out. I should say it in Japanese, and then people need to find someone who can translate what I'm saying and then use that as clues. But I shouldn't do that, should I? You're giving me this look like you're honestly not sure what I should do.
No, I think you should just say it stands for Kiss My.
Kiss My Hirosaki. That does sound Japanese. Kiss My Hirosaki. It sounds like it would be like a Japanese tourism slogan, actually.
That's what I tell people it stands for. Nobody's asked me, but if they did, that's what I would have told them.
Okay, so this is as close to an answer as I'm going to give. The K stands for a word which, in a non-standard dialect of Japanese, means the same as the standard Japanese word tomodachi. And the M is a kind of animal, which is not what I am because I'm an otter, and otter does not begin with M.
And there you go.
But that's all I'm going to say.
Do you have a prize for any listeners that write in with the correct answer?
If anyone can actually guess it, which I don't think I will. Okay, if anyone can actually piece this together, I will write you a 5,000-word short story.
All right.
I will do that. If anyone can actually tell me what the KM stands for and guess properly.
Remember, send in a kit. You're not eligible.
Yes, as a member of the staff and production crew of this podcast, you can't win.
He already wrote us a short story anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And it was it was longer than 5,000 words, so.
And there was some hot Wolf on Fox action in it.
Which I actually don't write all that often. It's really strange.
No, you should do
It
more
wasn't
of that.
until I wrote Pictures of You, which was 5+ years into my gay furry writing career, that I ever wrote Wolf on Fox.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, listeners. You can write to KyellG@yahoo.com or
KMHirosaki@hotmail.com.
either one of those. We are hoping to set up an Unsheathed email address soon, and we will let you know on our respective journals and FA accounts. We'll probably have an FA account for Unsheathed pretty soon, and then an email address following that.
Kiss my sheath at unsheathed.com.
I like that. All right, so the challenge has been thrown. And so his third question was...
Yes, what is your preferred writing medium? He mentions starting initial drafts with pen and then moving on to typing and then computer. I just type all of my stuff on my computer. I will take notes, like very sparse notes by hand. If I'm out and about and just need to jot down a note, I'll bust out a little notebook and just jot down a note, but all of my actual writing is on computer. My handwriting is so slow, and my hand cramps up really quickly when I write by hand, just because once you graduate high school these days, you don't really do a lot of handwriting anymore, and your hand loses the muscle capability to keep doing that for too long.
Yeah, that's why you have to use your mouth more of the time. And, yeah, I do the same. I type everything on computer. I did write the short story Stop the World, which is in Anthro at anthrozine.com. I wrote the first part of that on a smartphone, so I wrote it with thumbs. But that turned out to be fairly slow as well. So I think I brought it over to the computer at some point, about halfway or 2/3 of the way through it, and then did all the edits on computer. But it's just faster for me to write on a computer, and I sit by a computer all day, so I always have it there, and it's just easier. I mean, I type fast enough now, something like 60, 70 words a minute, so
Yeah.
I can get the ideas out, and when I try to handwrite, which I've done on airplanes every now and then, it just goes really slowly.
Also, my own writing style, I revise so much as I write that if I were writing by hand, I wouldn't be able to do it.
That drives me crazy when I'm handwriting, because I would think I'll write a sentence and then I'll want to go back and I'll end up scribbling out words and adding more words, and then when I'm transcribing it, I have to figure out what did I mean here and how does this go here, and it's just a pain.
Then you get like to the next paragraph and you go, oh, and you think of something to add into the paragraph before, and there's no easy way to put it in.
Yeah, and you have to scribble little notes in the margins, and it's just, yeah, it's not... No, thank God for computers. So, do you want to read the little exercise he proposes?
Oh, yes. So, he then suggests, having just listened to episode 3, where we were talking about different exercises and how to improve specific parts of your writing, have you ever heard of this one? Try to write a story where all the emotions of your characters are displayed through the skill of your writing and your characters' actions and interactions with each other. The catch? No dialogue. The characters do not speak at all. This is obviously easy for some emotions, for example, lust. But envy, jealousy, even hatred can be difficult. And I actually think that this is something that's actually probably good to practice with, because ideally, when you're displaying character emotions, you shouldn't need to have words behind all of them in general. Especially if you're writing in third-person limited, which is what most writing is. That's sort of one of the standard modes. It's what I tend to write in most frequently, where you're not privy to what other characters are thinking. And very often, characters aren't going to be saying what they're thinking, just because people don't just always wear their heart on their sleeves all the time. But you need to be able to pick up on their emotional states.
Right, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I think that's a good exercise, because in general, people don't say what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And so you want to know what they're thinking and be able to express that through action rather than through dialogue. And that's also a note to readers. I think the readers of our stories are pretty sophisticated, but it's really something to look at, because a lot of times readers will just read through the dialogue and they'll say, well, I don't understand why this character did this. They didn't say anything about it. I'm like, but didn't you notice the way that he was looking at the other person? That should tell you something. But, so...
I was remembering this one description. I don't remember if it was in a story or something that somebody said online, but the description of somebody giving somebody blowjob eyes. Which... It's funny because you say that and it sounds ridiculous, those two words back to back, but when you say, like, okay, like blowjob eyes, I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what facial expression that is.
Yeah, now I'm just singing Betty Davis eyes in my head over and over again.
Do we have any talented songwriters out there?
Maybe. One of the other exercises that we did that was similar to this was we had to do, and I think this was in one of the workshops we were in together. We had to write a scene where two characters had to express that they loved each other, but they couldn't say the word love. They couldn't say, I love you.
Yes, I remember that. I was with that, yes.
And actually, the interesting thing about that is I did that scene with Corey and Samaki from Waterways. And it's just about a page scene, but I don't think I ever transcribed it or posted it anywhere. I did handwrite it, I think, because I found it when I was
Did you let me
cleaning
read
out
that?
the
Because
closet.
it sounds familiar.
I think I probably did.
Okay.
They were to dinner with at one of the houses, and so they couldn't say I love you, but they were trying to show it in the way that they interacted during the meal. So that was kind of cute. I thought I should dig that up and post it. And
I find your company comforting, and I would like to put my penis inside you.
Or, as Carrie Fisher said, he comforted her. First with his shoulder, then with his penis.
I'm glad I've moved on to my regular laugh as opposed to the annoying, raspy, wheezy laugh I had at the beginning of this episode.
We're learning to be better podcasters, I think.
We are.
I'm trying not to say as much, because whenever I listen to the podcast, it really drives me crazy.
I used to get that all the time when I gave book reports and oral presentations in high school. I was all and like. Which is why I'm a writer and not a public speaker.
I'm sorry, I'm hung up on the word oral presentations now. But
that is not the prize you get for guessing what the KM stands for.
Talk about a disincentive. Well, I think that is all the questions we have time for. We're just about at our time. So thank you all for listening and writing in. We got some excellent questions this week, and we're looking forward to talking about them on a future podcast, as well as...
I'm really happy with the questions we've been getting.
Yeah, people have been great.
Yeah. We have not skipped anyone's questions, by the way. Sometimes we don't get to them for a couple of episodes, but we've been going over everything we've gotten so far, I think.
Yeah, nobody sent in anything that we kind of looked at and said, that's not worth talking about. Everyone's been really good. So keep them coming.
Yeah, and no duplication either.
No, not yet.
I mean, there have been questions that have been follow-ups and related to what we've been talking about, but nothing... Oh, we already touched upon that 3 episodes ago. Granted, we only have 5 episodes as of now, so...
Well, yeah. Once we get to episode, 200, we'll be like, are we talking about religion again? Damn it.
I'm just thinking 200 episodes. I'm like, that's 200 times I'd have to find at least one blowjob reference to get in.
Well,
do you remember 198 episodes ago when you made that androgynous robot fox blowjob story up?
I think if we get far enough down the road, we could potentially retire the blowjob reference, that section of the podcast, but we'll have to see how that goes.
I don't think blowjobs are ever going to suddenly not be relevant to what we both do, so I might...
Nor to what we both write.
Oh my god!
And with that...
for you listeners out there, by the way, you missed the priceless look he gave me when he said that. That was mint. And only Kit and I will ever know what that facial expression was like.
And it was not blowjob eyes. I'll tell you that.
It was not blowjob eyes.
All right.
If it was, I wouldn't still be talking to the podcast.
No, you wouldn't. But I think more because Kit would have put down the microphone and dragged me out of the room. So
it's okay. I still have half a bottle of wine I can drown my sorrows in.
Oh, and I think you'll be hitting that in about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think I will. So, in preparation of this closing of the evening bottle of wine, this has been K.M. Hirosaki.
And this is Kyell Gold. Thank you so much for listening, and keep writing in.